This is Mark's Musings, and I'm Mark. And today we have a special guest with us today, Joyce Poggi Hager, who has written a wonderful book called Jimmy and Me, and also some other books too. But today we're here at the studio at WCTV.org in Wilmington, Massachusetts, and we're going to be interviewing her and talking to her about her book. Good morning, Joyce.
Good morning, Mark.
How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you could make it here, and it's another hot day out there, but it's nice that we have air conditioning inside. Tell me a little bit about your book here, Jimmy and Me. I've been reading a little bit about it, and it sounds very intriguing. And how did you get started?
Right. So the subtitle is A Sister's Memoir. Jimmy and Me, A Sister's Memoir. And that's exactly what it is. It's a story of growing up with my brother. From my point of view, in the 1960s and 1970s, my brother has intellectual disabilities. And it's the story of how he shaped me, how being a sister to him really influenced me my entire life. Everything that I did and everything that became, I owe to my brother Jimmy.
What's the age difference between you and your sister and your brother?
Okay, so Jimmy and I are just 20 months apart, and we're sandwiched by an older sister and a younger sister.
Oh, okay.
So we're the closest in age, and I think that growing up, my mother thought, because we were closest in age and we were in school together, it just seemed natural that I was the one who took care of him a little bit during the day.
Sure. You like bosom buddies there.
Well, I don't know about that.
But sort of close.
But we were very close, and
yeah.
we were close in age, and we were in school together most of the time. Of course, he was in the special education classes,
yes,
but we did go to the schools together and walk to school together.
Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he related to you more than the other siblings.
Yeah, well, my older sister is several years older, and my younger sister was, the baby of the family. So yeah, Jimmy and I were sort of sandwiched in between.
Yeah.
It's the story. It's really about the challenges and the blessings
Yes.
of being a sister to him and having a brother like him in my life.
Did he have friends in the neighborhood?
He did.
Yes.
He did have a lot of friends in the neighborhood. We grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, and it was a big Italian neighborhood. I'm all
Sure.
Italian, and so when you grow up Italian, you hear about it every day.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of love and support in our neighborhood.
That's great. Yeah.
He actually played street hockey and basketball with the neighborhood kids, and actually was mainstreamed more than socializing more with the quote normal children
Yes.
than with the other special children with whom he was in school.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. Like he had a normal life that he related with his brothers and his sisters, and he also had friends in the neighborhood, and he seemed to be like a normal kid.
Well, it's funny. Normal's I guess there's different definitions of normal. What is normal? I'm not sure. I knew that when I was growing up, I knew that there was something different about Jimmy.
Yes.
I couldn't quite put my finger on it when I was a little girl. I just knew that he was a little bit different. He mumbled a lot. He tripped a lot. He was slow. My mother kept saying, Jimmy is slow, and I couldn't quite figure that out because to me, as a little girl, slow meant the opposite of fast.
Yeah.
And I knew he could run fast. I knew he could eat fast. So I was really kind of confused. But that was my mother's only explanation, and so that's what I heard. Jimmy is slow. But yes, he was mainstreamed. He was in the neighborhood, and in the early days when my mother knew something wasn't quite right, she heard from many doctors, just put him away. He'll never amount to anything.
Oh my God! Yes.
And that was very common in the early 60s.
Sure.
It was very common practice to institutionalize children like my brother.
Yes.
And but my mother was going to have none of that. She was a tenacious Italian woman, and she she was going to fight and advocate for him, and she did her entire life.
Yes.
So he, for me, he was my brother, and so he was, it's the only brother I ever knew. So
Sure.
again, what is normal?
Sure.
Normal is what I saw with him, but
Sure.
I knew that he wasn't advancing intellectually with other boys his age.
Did kids make fun of him in the neighborhood a little bit, or is
I think in school more. The
Did they?
neighborhood kids were very, very supportive.
Oh, good.
As I said, we had a very demonstrative, loving Italian neighborhood, and so I can still see their faces. Those boys were very inclusive, as I said, with street hockey. He would play the goalie because he was a big husky kid.
Oh, so
you
yeah.
know?
So
and
that was
he
his
had his
forte.
bike. But I think in school it was the social pressure and the bullying.
Of course, yeah.
was certainly
Yeah.
there, and I always sort of had my eye out for him, or if I passed him in the hallway or at the lunchroom, trying to make sure he wasn't getting badgered by anybody.
Did he have trouble with reading and writing, or was it sort of just slow?
It was
or
slow. Again, it was slow. I mean, I could remember sitting at the kitchen table with him with his composition book, and he would write. He was a lefty, and everybody in my family were righties. I could remember him lining up the numbers, so it would just take him a while. But interestingly, he's really good with numbers. I think he might have made a great accountant. He's always asking how much, how many miles. He loves any kind of question with quantity.
Wow. Yes.
And
yes.
he's fascinated by geography
Yes.
and numbers, and he's got a phenomenal memory. So I often thought that had he been born in 1986
Mhm.
or later instead of 1956, I think he would have advanced
Do you think-
significantly.
Do you think that was more artistic? Because we talked
Well,
about
we didn't talk about autism then. No, I don't think it
Okay.
was autism because he was, diagnosed brain damage. There was
Oh, okay.
damage to the brain, and
Okay.
there's, varying
degrees.
descriptions. I mean, when my mother said a few things, there was, maybe there wasn't enough oxygen to the
Oh, yes,
brain.
yeah.
When the doctor said it was an uneventful delivery, but in the book you'll read there was a couple. My mother theorized a few different reasons why
Sure,
it happened.
sure.
But no, I don't believe it was autism. But I do believe that. Again, back then there was one special education classroom.
Yes, yeah,
And it was
yeah.
typically at the end of the hall near the
Yeah.
nurse's station.
Yeah.
And sometimes you would just put not only children with brain damage like my brother, but maybe just disciplinary problems there.
Oh,
And so they just
yes.
sort of collectively were in one classroom, and that's what it was back then. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until the 70s and some new legislation passed that there were individualized education plans, and we got more specific treating or teaching children
Helping kids.
to their
Yes.
specific needs.
Well, that sounds good. So, during his growing up, he sort of generally did the same things that you did. He played in a neighborhood. He went to school. He socialized with the family.
Yes.
And
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
He did all of that.
Now, how did you keep records of? Or was your mother keeping a
My
diary?
mother! Oh my goodness! I still have all the files that my mother kept. She was extremely disciplined, very thorough. I still have every single piece of documentation on my brother from the 50s. Medical reports, academic reports.
Wow.
She was, as I said, a tenacious woman, and she kept track of everything, and she advocated very strongly for him to make sure that he would get the education and the services that he needed, which, again, back in the 60s and 70s, wasn't so easy.
It's
There
tough,
wasn't
yeah.
nearly as many services, support, and for that matter, empathy for children like my brother and families like my
that's right,
brother.
that's right,
But
yeah.
she was a strong woman, and yes, she kept records of everything.
So besides the records,
Mhm.
the physical records, did she also keep a journal too, sort of,
You know-
that described, his general demeanor?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Mhm.
As I said, she passed away almost 10 years ago, and I saw all her files. She loved to write, and I think that's where I got my love of writing and reading from my mother. She wrote a lot of letters, but I think she had one journal, but it was more about gardening, and it wasn't so much about her feelings about having Jimmy and having him for a son. She was very, very proud of him. Very proud.
So when you wrote this book, how did you accumulate the information, or is it just mostly from memory?
Well, it is a memoir, so yes, it is my memory, and some things I had to ask facts I had to verify with my older sister. She remembered more than my younger sister. My mother's best friends remembered some things. I would call, because I started writing, I wrote the first piece of this. I wrote the patterning scene in this book about a year after my mother passed away. And I don't think that was coincidental.
Yes.
I think it was a cathartic thing. And I just started writing, and I thought, oh, I think I might be writing a memoir. So, so a lot of my memories, some facts that I verified with my older sister. I did call my mother's closest friends. They remembered her when she was pregnant,
Yes.
and were helpful with a couple of facts.
Did you tape record some of these interviews?
No,
or
I
you
took
just
a lot of notes.
Just notes.
Took a lot of notes.
Yes.
Yeah, I did.
That's good. So you accumulated a lot of information from note taking from friends, family, etc., and
photos and
photos.
Again, my own memories. People have always told me that I have a vivid memory.
Yes.
And I think, because of my experience, those images of, walking to school with him, or patterning him, or sitting at the kitchen table with him, are just, they're just very strong memories.
Yes.
And I think I had to get them out. I didn't set out to write a memoir. I didn't even realize what I was doing in the beginning. As I said, I wrote an essay, and it's the patterning scene, which is in the beginning of the book. I was taking a couple classes at Grub Street, the Creative Writing Center in Boston.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I wrote that, and then I wrote the First Holy Communion scene, which the readers tell me they really like a lot. That's chapter 5.
Yes.
And then it kept going, and then, with a lot of encouragement from friends and fellow writers, I sort of pieced it together.
How about some of his sports friends or anything like that, or any of the friends from the neighborhood? Did you ever contact them?
They've dispersed.
I know. I was just wondering if they.
I'm here in Massachusetts. They're in the Philly area. I didn't really get in touch with. There was one or two in particular in the neighborhood that he was close with, but no, I didn't get their point of view.
Yeah, I just wondered if they had somehow kept in contact with him or remembered him.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because on his 60th birthday, 2 years ago, we did reach out to a few old timers.
Okay,
and
yes,
my younger sister lives in the area close to where we grew up. And believe it or not, we did. We heard from a friend who now lives in Florida.
Wow.
And another friend, and they were kind and sent cards and some gift cards to Jimmy for his 60th birthday. So, yeah. That was nice.
Well, that's good. At least you made some contact with different people along the way. That's super. So you started to accumulate these different chapters, the communion chapter and different other. And then when did you decide that you might like to put together as a book?
Yeah, it was. It happened over the several years, Mark. As I said, I wrote an essay, then I wrote another one, and I thought, geez, what am I doing with this? I don't know what I'm doing with this. And I was sort of off and on with it. There were times where I would just put it away for literally months at a time and not touch it. And I was sort of having doubts, but then the other piece of me would say, gee, this is good, just keep going, there's other families like yours out there.
Yes.
Because as a little girl, I felt very isolated and alone. I didn't know that there were other families like that. I thought my family and Jimmy was the only one who was special in that way.
Yes.
So, as I said, I would stop and start, and I had some good friends and that were saying, no, keep going. So again, off and on over a period of years, and then about maybe 3 years ago, I got really serious, and I said,
Okay,
you
good.
know, I think I was a little tired of just working on it. I thought, okay, I'm going to get this done. I want this done, and I also wanted something for my daughters. That was my
Yeah.
real motivation. They're in their 20s now, and I wanted something for them. I mean, they had known, of course, their uncle, and they'd heard me tell stories, but I wanted them to understand at a deeper level what my childhood was about, and I
Yes,
wanted a
yeah.
record. And so that motivated me to say, okay, Joyce, you're going to finish this. You're going to finish this.
Did
So
they, while you accumulated some of those chapters, did you give it to them to read?
not
Or-
to my daughters.
Okay.
No. I would read a little something, maybe a little excerpt to either a sister or my husband, and certainly writer friends. But no, they didn't know anything until it was right before I published it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they were surprised. Yeah.
Well, it is funny because during the editing process, I said, okay, to my sisters, it's time for you to read it. And they were like, wow, finally. And I was really, really worried about my sisters. You know, what were they going to say? And they, you know, gave me their blessing and said, don't change anything. You know, yes, we grew up in the same home, but this is your story, and we support you, which was wonderful. My daughters, I gave it to them, and they were really, really complimentary. And my older daughter wrote me a letter that actually brought me to tears, and
Oh,
she
my
said,
God.
you know,
So she understood. Yeah.
we always knew, you know, the stories that you told, but now we understand better.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and she's a teacher, and my younger daughter was just as complimentary. So that was very gratifying for me.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah.
That you feel like you reached them.
I
Yeah,
did,
yeah.
and I felt like anything else is going to be icing on the cake.
Yeah. And you were writing the book for your daughters too,
I was.
so they would understand your childhood. Yeah.
Well, you know, while I was in the beginning, Mark, when I was, you know, going sort of off and on, I kept saying, gee, what am I doing? Why am I,
Uh-huh.
you know, why am I doing this? And then something clicked, and that's when I said, okay, I'm going to finish this for my daughters.
Yeah.
And so that was a real motivation for me. That's when I got serious, and I hired an editor, and I hired a cover designer, and
Yes.
and then I hired a copy editor as well. And I said, okay, I'm gonna do this. I was scared, but I'm gonna do this.
So, did you self-publish afterwards?
I did.
yourself?
I
Yes.
did self-publish. I had sent a couple query letters to agents here and there, and you know, no one wants to really take a shot on an unknown. Even though I had a blog and I was posting you know, for over 4 years and writing personal essays, and had been published. Some of my personal essays have been published. You know, I would get this, hey, you know, thanks but no thanks, or you know, send me your first 20 pages and then nothing. So I
Yeah.
thought, you know, wait a minute, Joyce. Every job you ever got, you got on your own. So why don't you just do this on your own?
Yes.
And that's when I looked into Create Space, which is the self-publishing arm of
Yes.
Amazon. And I said, I'm going to do this. I will hire editor, and I will hire a copy designer, but I'm going to do it this way.
I think you took all the right steps, you know, to publish a book, because now you have a full-blown book. It's been edited. You don't have any questions about its readability, you know, so it's readable, and it also it hits home for a lot of people because they sort of relate to your struggles growing up and your relationship with your brother. And
Well, as you know, I say on my website, there's a phrase. I say every family has a story. Every family has something that they're
course, yes.
struggling with.
Yeah.
And mine was a brother who has intellectual disabilities. But every family has a struggle. And I think that this book, you know, any parent who has had to advocate for a child will relate to this, no matter what generation they're from.
Yeah.
And particularly teachers and caregivers of intellectually disabled individuals will have a deep appreciation for this story. But again, I think it's a family story first.
Yes.
And it's a
Yeah.
story of sibling love. And there's some rough patches in here. It's not all Pollyanna. I mean, but it is a family story, and I just feel that, you know, being a sister to Jimmy was really the greatest gift that I ever had,
Yes,
because
yeah.
he taught me the greatest lessons in life about, compassion and love and discipline and
Wow.
Resilience
Yes,
and
that's nice.
and all of that.
Yes.
So I feel very grateful for that. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I was a
Sure.
college graduate until and then I realized that he gave me the greatest lessons in life.
Yeah.
So it is a family story, and my readers consistently tell me that my writing makes them laugh and cry, and that's something I hear consistently. When I had the blog, and I put together my other book, which is a collection of personal essays called Musing Off the Mat. That's the consistent theme. They can laugh on one page and cry on the next. So I'm getting a visceral reaction from my reader, and that makes me glad.
That's great. That's super. Yeah, did some of the things did your brother interact with his mother and father in any way? Did your father was an iron worker? Did he go to work with your father?
Actually, he did go to work with my dad
Yeah.
at one point. Yeah. Well, he had after Jimmy graduated high school, he went to 3 years of vocational training.
Okay.
Until he was 21, and then he had a series of jobs, and then when Jimmy was around 30, it was close to where my dad was getting ready to retire. He took Jimmy on the job with him, and he had been a little reluctant to do that because he was working on these buildings, and there was a lot of it was dangerous. They were dangerous.
Safety problems.
Exactly,
Yeah.
safety problems, and my father was very worried about that. But Jimmy rose to the occasion. He was in charge of the acetylene torch and
Oh boy.
and on job sites. And one thing about Jimmy and my sisters that my parents modeled is a very strong work ethic. So we're always on time or early for everything, and Jimmy's right there and wouldn't want to miss a day of work. In fact, in the book you read a funny story about how I happened to get married on a Friday night, and they had to come up from Pennsylvania, and Jimmy was a little upset because he had to miss a couple days of work.
Oh.
And he says, I'm not getting paid for these couple days. He didn't want to miss that. But
So you mentioned some acetylene torch at the construction site.
sites.
Did he learn skills like that, like how to operate different things?
Yeah, my dad kept him on the ground. He didn't go up in the high rises,
Yes.
but he was working rebar,
Yeah.
which is really backbreaking work.
Sure.
Tying the rebar and doing that. So those are manual skills that he did with my dad for a few years.
You mentioned in the book too that you learned how to cook with your mother.
Yeah.
And so did your brother also help with the kitchen? Or?
No, he eats a lot.
I thought maybe he became a cook too.
No, he's not a cook, but he definitely loves the Italian food. He's our taste tester. Whenever we were making Christmas cookies, he'd come in and do all the taste testing.
Sure.
So, no.
It seems like someone that's like me. I'm a good taster too. Well, that sounds terrific. Now, did you want to say anything about the other book that you have?
Yeah, actually, so my first book, before my goal was to publish Jimmy and Me. And as I was working on Jimmy and Me and taking classes at Grub Street, someone said, you really ought to start a blog. And I thought, what am I going to blog about? And it'll be a good exercise. And anyway, I love yoga. Yoga's a big, important part of my life. And I just had this light bulb moment. I thought, I'm going to write about yoga and midlife. And anyway, this book is called Musing Off the Mat. So I started the blog, and the blog was called.
How often did you contribute to the blog?
I blogged every single Monday for 4 years, and
Wow.
sometimes more frequently. So there were some months where I would blog maybe 6 or 8. I've had 6 or 8 blog posts based on what was going on. For example, when I returned from my trip to Italy,
Yes.
I had a lot to share and photos, so I blogged about that. So I blogged consistently, and I really enjoyed it. I thought I was going to be writing more about yoga, but I found out that my readers, the reader comments on the blog, they loved the family and the
Where was your
home
blog
stories.
located? What was
It was on WordPress.
On WordPress, okay.
Yep, on WordPress. And I kept getting all this feedback about how much they loved the family stories. So, but I wrote about family, food, the home, yoga, travel,
Oh, yes.
just a variety of things.
Yeah.
And then after about 4 years, I was losing a little motivation, and my father fell ill, and I was spending more time with him. And so I tabled the blog, but I thought, gee, I don't want to leave everything to the blogosphere. I think what I'm going to do is take the best of, sort of the reader favorites, and compile them into an anthology.
That's nice, yeah.
And so that's what Musing Off the Mat, and the subtitle is Memories and Everyday Moments, is all about. It's the best of. It's almost like a chicken soup for the soul. So it's a great book that you could pick up and put down. You don't have to necessarily read it from start to finish. There are some recipes in here, some popular recipes, and so that's just a fun, so I wound up publishing that first.
Oh, okay.
I published both of these in 1 year, in 2017. But I published the Musing book first. I felt confident with the material.
Yes.
And so that came out in May of 2017 while I was in the editing phases of Jimmy and Me, and then Jimmy and Me came out in November of 2017.
Wow. So you had a successful year with 2 books.
Yeah, I was pleased.
That's super. Very good. So anyway, that sounds terrific. I think your both books here are an exciting read that anyone would be happy to look into. And where can we get these books if we wanted to purchase them?
Right. So the easiest place would be Amazon. They're both on Amazon. Also BarnesandNoble.com on their .com website. But Amazon, I would say, locally, we're in Wilmington. There are some local stores that carry the book. One of them is Helen Thomas Simply Smashing in Andover on Main Street. Winchester Books in Winchester carries books. I Am Books, the Italian-American bookstore down in the North End, carries them. Jabberwocky in Newburyport.
Nice,
and
wow.
West Village Provisions in Boxford, Mass. Carries them.
How did you get to have those bookstores carry your book, or did you make a personal contact?
Yeah, I just went in, and these stores, I have to say, I love these small bookstores, and I'm a big fan of shopping local. Even though they're on Amazon, I really love, to support local businesses. And I walked in and I found that these businesses in particular, the ones that I just mentioned, were just so welcoming, really welcoming.
Yeah.
And West Boxford Provisions and Winchester Books and I Am Books actually hosted me earlier this year.
So you had like a book launch?
Right.
Yes.
Well, it wasn't a launch, but it was just a reading and presentation. So they were just very welcoming. So it's nice to do business with them.
So they had some refreshments there, and some people, no, they didn't have that. Okay. So you were just there for meeting people.
Yeah, presentation. And I usually give a presentation. I'll be doing that. I have a couple of gigs lined up in the next couple of months also.
Oh, nice,
some libraries and a couple other things. So, people will come and listen to my presentation. I have photos that I have from back in the 60s. People love
Do you have
old
an
photos.
agent that does this, or you have
No,
mostly yourself?
Yeah, that's it. I'm sort of the agent,
That's
the publisher.
Great. Well, you certainly have made a lot of progress with all this.
Thank you.
Putting your name out there and making the contacts. That is so encouraging.
Thank you.
And so super. Okay, so those are the books, places that we could get the books. You have a website.
I have a website. People can go to my website. It's joycepoggihager.com. And you can read all about me, a bio. I do have a blog. I don't blog as frequently as I used to, but I do put fun stuff up there now and then about events or just some personal essays. I do love writing personal essays, and I am writing more of them. You can find out where I'll be. I have an events page there, and a little more about the books as well. JoycePoggiHager.com.
Well, that sounds wonderful. So we've sort of covered the whole gamut now of your book and the 2 books that you have, where they're located, and how people could continue to learn more about you from your website too. So, would you like to add anything else before we close?
Well, I want to thank you very much for having me. This is a real delight, and I hope that people will go out and buy the book, either locally or on Amazon. And I promise that they will laugh out loud and maybe even shed a tear. And the bonus on the Musing book is there's some fun recipes in there. So I think they also make great gifts. The holidays will be upon us before you know it.
Sure.
So those are always, it's always
Yeah,
nice to get
yeah.
I know I love getting books as gifts.
Those are books that you could keep at your bedside and pick up anytime.
Absolutely.
And just for inspiration.
Even particularly the musing book. The memoir is something you definitely need to read start to finish. The musing book, one of my friends told me that she keeps it next to her bathtub, and after a hard day's work, she enjoys it there. And
There you
another
go.
person said they have it on their nightstand. So
Yeah.
it's light reading, and I
Light-
think that particularly with all the crazy news that's going on,
I
and
know
all
people need to have some light
they
reading
need
and
some light. And
relax.
right, musing off the mat will do that. Jimmy and Me will make people appreciate and relate definitely to the family story.
Well, sounds terrific. Thank you so much for this time that we've had here with this interview. I really appreciate it, and I've learned a lot from your discussion here. And so I guess we have reached the end of the program.
One other thing I'd like to offer is that I'm available for book group discussions. I've attended a few, and I really enjoy that. So if you're a member of a book club and you'd like to have me come to your book club meeting or even phone in, I'd be delighted to do that.
That sounds wonderful. I also heard that you were going to be speaking at some libraries, lined up some speaking engagements there. But besides the libraries, you also have these book group discussions.
Right, I do.
Sounds good. Okay, we'll let people know about that, and I will squeeze that into the interview.
Thanks.
And if anyone, again, wishes to listen to the podcast, it's called Mark's Musings, and it's broadcast on WCTV.org and simultaneously on SoundCloud and on iTunes. So with that, the program has come to a close. We thank everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.
Bye, Mark. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.